From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. We're going to talk about the politics of this plan, this Comrade Kamala plan. We're going to bring in Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, and his new book is Progressively Worse. Boy, progressively worse is the truth. It gets worse and worse. You're so right. Why today's Democrats ain't your daddy's donkey. No, Joe. I think you should rename it. It gets progressively worse, folks. It's fantastic. And we've got Ned Ryan, president of American Majority and Voter Gravity, and his new book coming out next month, American Leviathan, The Birth of the Administrative State and Progressive Authoritarianism. You know, Joe, remember on the show, on the TV show, you were saying she had one big decision. This is before the bombing speech yesterday, but she had one big decision. She chose this left-wing progressive guy from Minnesota, Ted Walz, that's his name, Governor Walz. But now, Joe, she's had a second major decision, and she's chosen a far-left, essentially big government socialist, Comrade Kamala plan. So I would, take it from there because her claim to be a centrist, I don't care what her flip-flopping is, the two big decisions show she's a far lefty. That's it. And I think the country sees that with clarity.
Larry, it shows that she is a horrible candidate. This is amateur hour. I mean, the first major mistake, selecting Tampon Tim. I mean, that couldn't have been good. How do you vet this person, not know about the stolen valor, not know, oh, yeah, I let Minnesota burn to the ground, and obviously tampons in elementary school boys' rooms. That was like as far left a candidate as she possibly could have chosen for a state that hasn't gone red since 1972, so he doesn't deliver that. And there you had just Josh Shapiro sitting out there. It's Josh Shapiro sitting out there at 65% approval in the state where anybody you talk to says whoever wins Pennsylvania is going to win this election. And that certainly would have gone a long way in helping her do that by picking a popular governor in a state she needs. And instead she goes with Walz. And now her first major economic speech. And you're talking about, and you talked about it on the air extensively on Fox. They had you all over the place after this came out, and rightly so. All you have to do is just look at the precedent in Venezuela, in Cuba, in the old Soviet Union.
And Nixon.
For that matter. Yeah,
Nixon.
Exactly.
Hey, let's not forget Richard Nixon.
Don't forget about me.
We're bipartisan here. Nixonomics.
Yeah.
Here, the Wall Street Journal editorial this morning, Kamala Harris endorses Nixonomics.
Well, you know what? No, it's not. All right, I expect that from the Wall Street Journal. What I'm not expecting is CNN is killing this proposal. And when you've lost CNN, you've lost the argument. Harris's plan to stop price gouging could create more problems than it solves. Right? So at Washington Post even, we saw that a great editorial where they said, if you want to stop being called a communist, maybe don't propose communist ideas. I'm paraphrasing, but so this thing's getting killed everywhere. And it just shows she thinks that we're living in a far-left country, and we are not. It is center, right of center. And if she just ran to the center, faked it like Barack Obama did, she'd be in a much better position. But trust me, when polls come out in like a week or two and this really starts to settle in, I think you'll see that this was a decisive momentum changer, that speech yesterday.
Yeah, I think I think she's peaked already. I've seen a bunch of polling numbers that suggest that. Ned Ryan, I want to Catherine Rampell, whose father and mother are good friends of mine. Catherine doesn't like me; she hates Donald Trump, but she came out against it. But the Washington Post editorial board came out against it.
Right.
I didn't think that was possible that they would come out against some progressive idea, but they have, citing the high cost of groceries, housing, and even $5.29 Big Macs. While the inflation rate has cooled, the Biden administration prices remain elevated relative to the Trump years, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you lose them, that's it. I think somebody told me yesterday the New York Times editorial came out. I didn't see that yet. But in any case, pretty much everybody's coming out against it, Ned.
Yeah, no, and because they realize how absurd and ridiculous, we have all kinds of empirical evidence that, for a moment there, Larry, I did have hope when she said she was going to address price gauging.
Yeah.
And hope that she wasn't going to actually address price
And the
gouging.
crowd still applauded.
Yes, wildly.
That was the best part of, you don't even know what she's saying. But it's it is Soviet-style economics. It's communism. It's failed miserably everywhere. It's led to empty grocery shelves. It's led to bread lines. We see Maduro in Venezuela, I think it was 1,300% inflation on groceries when he did price controls. I thought the other thing that was pretty interesting, Larry, is we just lived something in 2008 called the subprime mortgage crisis, in which it collapsed the world's economic meltdown globally. She proposes a $25,000 first-time down payment for first-time homeowners. Are we going to really redo that again? Why on earth, if somebody needs a $25,000 down payment, would a loan officer look at that person and go, yeah, I think we should approve you for a mortgage? It's like we're setting up another subprime mortgage crisis. But again, everything that she said yesterday was absolutely insane, not only communist-style economics, but we just lived some of this less than 20 years ago, and you're proposing the exact same thing. And I agree with Joe. I think the next wave of polls are going to be pretty brutal. And the thing that I want to remind people on the polls, I think Trump's got to be ahead 4 or 5 points in these battleground states. And I think you might start to see some of that reflected in those numbers in the next few weeks because, you know, the left has a very good ballot harvesting game, and they can finagle 2 or 3 points. What they can't do is finagle 5 or 6.
Well, you know, $25,000 subsidy for first-time home buyer, all that does is raise the price of a home.
Yep.
Right.
So you will get, in other words, home prices across the board will be raised by $25,000. The other point I'd make, it's an economic point, but it'll hit politically, is she is spending about $2 trillion on this. See, that's, to some extent, the price gouging or price control. By the way, no one knows what price gouging means. No one knows it. I mean, St. Louis Fed has looked at it. The San Francisco Fed has looked at it. They don't know what it means, and they said whatever it means, it's not happening. But the point is, all of her tax credits, she's boosting tax credits for almost everybody under the sun. And the price out by the Committee for Responsible Budget, they're not a supply-side shop. They're kind of in the middle. Maya McGinnis, they're pricing this out as $2 trillion. So there's more deficit spending, which means prices will go up, inflation will go up, and so will interest rates, Joe. That's the thing. There's no – if you want to deal with the inflation problem, you've got to cut spending and deficits. You must, and they won't. And all she wants to do is raise taxes across the board. It's not going to fly. People see right through it.
Yeah, that worked out well for Walter Mondale, right, when you run on raising taxes. And the whole thing about this is it repeats a pattern that the Biden-Harris administration has shown. Because remember what they did with student loan forgiveness, right, when 87% of Americans don't have one dime of student loan debt, so they have to pay for the 13% who took out the loan but now don't have to pay it back. What is the ultimate result of doing that? Colleges only will raise their tuition for children in the future that eventually attend there as young adults because they know that the government's just going to bail out these people and give them money to pay for the tuition anyway. So that's the real problem. And it's the same thing with this. So I swear this is complete and total amateur hour from the vice president, and now it really puts that focus back on that debate on ABC again. And I am holding out hope, and maybe Ned's not with me on this one, but if they chose George Stephanopoulos, then I would not have any hope that there wouldn't be any real bias in this and even some questions being shared in advance. But I think David Muir, he's kind of like the Gavin Newsom of evening news. Like, you don't hear about him in terms of bias all that much. He's more on the fluffier side, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I could see him doing what Tapper and Bash did, where if anybody wants to accuse ABC News of bias, he's going to prove that, nope, we're going to ask some good, fair questions. And I just hope he goes the Tim Russert route, where he reads back Kamala Harris's own words on XYZ, and then watch this person, who is the Ron Burgundy of presidential candidates. In other words, if you put it in the teleprompter, Kamala will read it. And without that teleprompter, when she has to explain why it's a good idea to go ahead with price gouging, or what Ned mentioned before as far as the $25,000 for a down payment given what happened in September of 2008, I don't think she has the ability to explain it, and it's going to be like Joe Biden in Atlanta all over again without the dementia.
Price gauging.
Excuse me, I always get that wrong.
Price gauging. The teleprompter revolted. I mean, blame the teleprompter, man. Price gauging.
Yeah.
Ned, are you old enough to remember Richard Nixon's whole story? I was. my first job many years ago, 1973, in the aftermath, but Nixon's price controls in 71, the worst of it was lifted, but they had price guidelines, quote unquote. They had different forms of wage and price controls right through the 1970s, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. And it wasn't until Reagan came along that he abolished all of them, and particularly in the oil price controls and gasoline price controls. And I remember people lined up at gas stations, and by the way, they were shooting each other to get to the gas pump. That's how bad it got. I'm not kidding. There were shootings. And everyone said to her, I was in the assistant director of the Office of Managed Budget in that time, and James Schlesinger, the former energy secretary, who was a friend of mine, the late Jim Schlesinger, he and I, we bet $100. I said, if Reagan removes the controls, prices are going to go down. And he said, if Reagan removes controls, prices are going to go from $40 to $100 for gasoline. Prices collapsed. Oil prices went to $12, $10 a barrel after Reagan removed controls. Now, because that's a fun period, and I want to bring that back because Kamalanomics is going to bring that back into the spotlight.
Yeah, no, I'm barely old enough to remember the gas lines, Larry. I definitely remember. Was born and raised in Southern California, and I remember this was late '70s, early '80s. It was late '70s, sitting in line, waiting in gas lines. But can we address also the fact of her price gouging doesn't address the fundamental issues of some of the reasons that grocery prices are through the roof. And again, I would remind people when they talk about the gouging that's taking place, I think grocery stores have like a 1.2 to 1.8% profit margin. So the reason the prices have gone up, obviously they're inflationary spending, printing up money like it's monopoly money, but it's also their obsession with this global warming hoax and the complete destruction of our own energy supplies. And what they have done is increase the fuel costs, the transportation costs, which have obviously led to higher grocery prices. And so when you talk about some of the things that Trump is going to do, he always talks pretty much in every speech, drill, baby, drill. I mean, there's a lot of different things when you talk about removing price controls, but it's also Trump being very realistic about we have incredible energy resources. We could actually address, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 issues by simply going out and saying we're going to unleash our energy potential. And that not only will obviously deal with transportation costs and the fuel costs and inflation, all those things, but obviously is going to make us stronger economically. And so, yeah, I mean, everything that they're doing, they're saying we brought about this inflation. I mean, she pretty much did a Trump commercial yesterday.
Well, it's a gift.
Up 50%.
And she's given Trump.
Things and said,
I'm
going to somehow fix it.
She's given Trump 2 gifts, Joe. One in Minnesota and now one on price controls. 2 gifts. And he'll pick up eventually the deficit spending of $2 trillion. And he himself is doing something he didn't really do back in 2016 or 2020. He's talking about big budget cuts. He's talking about rescinding unspent funds. Now, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but if you obligate or authorize spending, but you do not actually spend it, okay, presidents have the authority to rescind the unspent monies. Now, it has to pass through the House and the Senate, which I think probably going to go Republican. But you can see that she's going to keep on spending. He doesn't want to spend. And I think that's a big issue with the public. They don't like spending. They don't like spending even more than they want lower taxes because they equate spending with inflation quite properly. And I think he'll take advantage of that, Joe.
Yeah, people have home budgets. They know don't spend what you don't have. And if you do, then you're going to be chasing interest for the rest of your life and minimum payments. So I think that's genius because we saw what happened with COVID, and I know you got to go. But COVID, they passed all these trillions in spending, and then they would pass more billions to follow that before the other parts were even spent. So it's just logic. And if Trump runs as the common sense candidate, he's been saying that a lot more lately, and he does what he did yesterday with all those all those items on a table and saying this is what this costs, this is what this costs, and just bring it down to like simple terms like this is what's happened over the last 4 years. Think about what you had with me before the pandemic. And I think when people have that choice, it's a pretty easy decision in states that matter.
I think so. Common sense is going to prevail. Let's take a quick break. Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, Ned Ryan, American Majority. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
Larry Kudlow. From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
Welcome back, folks. We're talking to Joe Concha, Fox News contributor, and his new book is Progressively Worse, Why Today's Democrats Ain't Your Daddy's Donkeys. And Ned Ryan, president of American Majority and Voter Gravity, and his new book out in a couple weeks, American Leviathan, The Birth of the Administrative State and Progressive Authoritarianism. Indeed. Joe Concha, you looking forward to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to be like, I never visited Gaza, but I think Gaza will be coming to Chicago, right? I went to Panama City and Cancun for my spring breaks. But the point is, yeah, I mean, you're going to see more Palestinian flags, Hamas flags outside the United Center, where the Bulls play, the Blackhawks play. It's
you're right about that. It will be like Gaza. I hadn't thought
100,000.
Yeah. Like Gaza meets Hanukkah, because it's going on for basically 7 crazy nights, 8 crazy nights. So it's going to be a mess. And I mean, it's going to be so choreographed, obviously, and a big celebration for Kamala. But in the end, what's going on outside of it's going to make 1968 look like a picnic.
Well, all right, Ned, I go to you on this because 2 things occur to me. One is that outside the convention is going to be a mess. I'm going to get back to that. But inside the convention, they may try to cleanse the speakers list, but they're still going to have the Democratic Party, the Elizabeth Warrens of the world. They're going to speak. They're going to speak, and Bernie Sanders and them, and the public is going to hear this big government socialism and progressivism and left-wingism. And I think it's going to be a real problem. I do. People may have temporarily forgotten, with the Kamala hoopla, they may have forgotten what is really inside the Democratic Party. It's all going to. They're all going to speak for 4 days.
Correct. No, I mean, people say this is the farthest left ticket that they've ever put up, and I think that's only partly true. I mean, these are neo-Marxists, both Kamala and Tim Walz. And I think you're going to see some of that ideology on display all week. And it really does, for me, Larry, show that the neo-Marxist socialist takeover of the Democratic Party is complete. They have put 2 of the furthest left candidates at the top of the ticket. They have shuttled off, Dementia Joe and those that might have quasi-held on to some moderate beliefs off to the side. And they've dropped the masquerade. I think this is the thing that's interesting to me. They needed to Trojan horse their far left ideals through Joe Biden. They've dropped all pretense now. There's no mask. There's no more masquerade. This is who they are. And I think she made that very clear yesterday. And I think we're going to see that on display all next week. And I think what troubles me is they're not even being shy about it. We have a very, very clear choice now. It's either freedom or, quite frankly, it is communism.
No, it's
I hope that
big government.
I hope the American
socialism.
people make the right decision. Well,
I don't like communism.
Well, the Green New Deal. I just want to make the Green New Deal is coercive socialism.
Yeah, it's big government. Newt calls it big government socialism. Communism, you're talking about expropriating the means of production. They don't do it that way. They do it through the regulatory state nowadays. That's why I thought Newt's label big government socialism is right. And also communism, and I don't like it when Mr. Trump uses communism either. It reminds you of Stalin killing 50 or 70 million people. And I don't, as awful as that was historically, I don't think the present-day Democrats are in that boat. What they're doing is they're just having a government takeover of the economy through the regulatory state or through the tax and spending state. That, I think, is more accurate than straight-up communism. But I digress. I don't want to defend them. I'm just trying to get into what this really is. Joe, let me ask you something. Talking about Gaza outside the convention hall, which I think is a key point, that will be blamed on Kamala Harris, just as, many years ago, the 68 riots were blamed on Hubert Humphrey. That's going to be blamed on her, won't it?
Yeah, there'll be a juxtaposition of Chicago and what it's going to look like, and we're already hearing it's going to be a huge, huge mess, likely some violence, some police may get hurt, all that stuff. And then you put that side by side with Minneapolis or San Francisco, the two cities that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were made in charge of. And plus, you could be facing some legal problems here as well, because I heard the Karl Marx estate is suing for copyright infringement, guys. That's big.
That's exactly right. Well, she should have footnoted Trump's no tax on tips. Just a little footnote. Anyway, Joe Concha, thank you. Ned Ryan, thank you.